Welcome to the film analysis. Today with the question, is film criticism subjective? It's an often heard accusation. Film criticism is subjective. Everyone has his own taste. It can't all be proven objectively. Is it worth anything at all? Of course. As a critic, you don't want to proclaim objective truths. Objectivity is an illusion anyway. Film reviews naturally feature subjective content. However, they should not be subjectivist in doing so, a distinction one must make. Under no circumstances should one fall into this postmodern trap and say, there is no such thing as a correct or true statement in any form. Actually, everything is relative. But what is the difference between subjective and subjectivist film criticism? A film review is subjectivist when tasteful judgments dominate, especially when personal feelings and inclinations get the upper hand. For example, one values films because one considers a certain actor to be attractive and can thus be manipulated. One should not allow oneself to be deceived by the respective star on the screen. Of course, cinema is also an art of seduction, but you must know your own desires and be able to put a critical distance between yourself and them. Without distance, there is no criticism. Hence why I prefer to sit at the end of the row in the cinema, refusing to be completely absorbed by the film. The worst excess of subjectivist film criticism, however, is when the evaluation of films is made dependent on one's own mood at the time. Neither the happiness of love nor fine weather, headaches or tiredness may cloud the judgment. As a film critic, you evaluate a work and not your own feelings. Unfortunately, a common practice on television in casting shows, some singer presents a little song with the jury stating afterwards, I was so incredibly moved, I had goosebumps, I had to cry. Completely nonsense, of course. You can get goosebumps at a funeral, at a wedding, when it's cold or when you have a fever. It doesn't say anything at all. As a film critic, one should not take oneself personally too seriously. You must not bother the recipients of your criticism with your intimacy. It must primarily be about the work. Subjectivist film criticism is arbitrary, unfair, and anti-intellectual. And yet, film criticism does carry some subjectivism that can hardly be avoided. After all, it's not pure mathematics. You can't use algorithms to calculate a film's strengths and weaknesses. Film criticism works differently. People create and evaluate films, but the film critique is always hovering over an abyss. In the final pages of his monumental work on the Second World War, Winston Churchill ponders the nature of the statesman and concludes that the statesman is the decider. After weighing all the positions and warnings, after listening to all the experts, he must decide. As thoroughly as everything has been considered, the decision ultimately remains in the balance. John F. Kennedy later said that, in a certain sense, the act of decision-making always remains mysterious, both to the observer and to the decision-maker himself. What is certain is that the sovereign is the one who takes the risk and carries out the act of decision-making. As is true for the film critic's role, he may not decide on life and death, war and peace, but he does decide, albeit in a differentiated and not purely binary way, whether a film is good or bad. Of course, criteria prevail, and nothing would be more wrong than to claim that taste is subjective, and what is one man's trash is another man's treasure. That would be pure relativism. All kinds of taste exist, good, mediocre, and ideologically questionable. One must not fall into a relativism, comparing Transformers or the Avengers with Vertigo or The Shining. Anyone who talks like that either needs glasses or doesn't have all his faculties. The statesman, as described by Churchill and Kennedy, also has criteria for his decision. Of course, but even with a catalogue of evaluation criteria, one can never fully grasp a work. As the critic watches a film, he consciously or unconsciously compares it with his viewing experiences, thinks about ideological implications, and evaluates individual performances such as camera, dialogue, actors, etc. Afterwards, his critique is probably more complex than good or bad, yet it demands opinion and clarity. It always remains a decision-making act. There is a way around this precarious situation, and unfortunately many critics make use of it. One takes refuge in a mere on the one hand, but on the other hand, considers both sides. One describes but does not evaluate. Many critics are afraid to be sovereign. They are Hamlets, perpetual procrastinators, boring readers with their indecision. In anti-authoritarian times, authority is not welcome, although it is more necessary than ever. But where does this authority stem from? Certainly not from a higher being, neither a god nor an emperor or tribune. The principle of authority to which we must adhere is a modern one. The art theorist Barton Brock speaks of authority through authorship. But what does that mean? Brock writes, "It means that an individual is capable of judging and making statements as an individual. In principle, everyone can evaluate films, but some are more, some less capable, some people are listened to, others not, and something else matters. Whoever evaluates a film must have a point of view from which to speak. Anyone who says he will just let a film influence him is seriously mistaken." There is no such thing as an unbiased view. We are all shaped by what we already know. We are influenced by our worldview, by the media and by ideologies. Whether a film is good or bad must be decided on a case-by-case basis. Basically, a director and his team must master the craft. Even if you intend to undermine the typical rules of filmmaking, you must be capable of doing so. But one should look at the film as a whole. You can't expect Hitchcock's actors to exercise empathy, because empathy simply doesn't play a role in Hitchcock's concept. He loved the expressionless actor. Expression for him was a question of the right cut. And Paul Verhoeven's Showgirls is, of course, only so good because Elizabeth Berkley plays so incredibly badly. Back to the point of view one must take, this has nothing to do with subjectivism for a start. Truth can only be articulated, Slavoj Žižek and Alain Badiou emphasize this again and again, from one position. Only from there can it assume any universal character at all. The film analysis takes an ideology-critical standpoint. This has a long tradition rooting back to the 1920s to Siegfried Kracauer. Kracauer wrote films are mirrors of society, precisely why mainstream films are particularly interesting in this respect. They are created least autonomously. They are virtually permeated by ideologies, political, religious, military and economic ones. Walter Benjamin once warned not the economic emergence of culture, but in culture is to be portrayed, already providing one with the necessary distance to evaluate a film. For Siegfried Kracauer, it was clear anyway. In short, the film critique of distinction is only conceivable as a society critique. Contemporary film criticism suffers from the fact that it no longer includes ideological criticism. It is often too tasteless, subjectivistic, and does not really take film seriously, as it denies film's ideological implications. It basically assumes films only want to entertain, but that's not their sole purpose. Film criticism too rarely takes a stand. But if you don't have a point of view from which to speak or write, you shouldn't become a film critic, but perhaps rather an influencer. Film critics can only be those who want to see and not just watch.
It would be nice if you would like to support the film analysis financially. You can do so via my bank account or PayPal. Also, you can find me on Patreon. Thank you very much.